Hello everyone, welcome to Chetan Bharat Learning and welcome to the first lecture of your UPSC Mains 2021 course. This course also includes your test series. Now we have come up with this course for those people who have qualified their prelims examination. First of all, congratulations to all those who have qualified their prelims examination. Well done. Now your next challenge is mains examination. Now, as you guys all know by now, that mains examination requires a different set of preparation tools. It requires a different strategy. So to help you all, we have come up with this course so that you can shift your strategy accordingly. All right. Now, you must have watched Chetan sir's video. In that video, Chetan sir discussed how we will proceed with this course. Right? So let me give you an idea in brief how we will proceed with these lectures. All right? You must have been, all those who have enrolled in this course, you must have been shared this timetable. Right? You all have this timetable, and in this timetable, we will cover each and every topic of your general studies through question answer format. Right? So we'll be covering different issues that are important for your mains examination through question answer format. Now, according to your timetable, today is Monday, 25th of October, and you'll be getting two classes. One from economics and the other would be from environment and disaster management. In these two classes, we'll cover 5 questions, and those 5 questions would be covering different issues that are important. So through these lectures, you'll be able to understand how you need to write answers. You need to understand how you should approach different questions that are going to be asked in your mains examination. Right? So we'll be teaching you how to approach the questions and what sort of material you should include in your answers depending on the question. All right? Now we will spend good 10 classes for economics. All right? As per your timetable, we'll be discussing 50 questions from economics and 50 questions from environment and disaster management. 30 questions from environment and disaster management. All right. Now, today's class shall be dedicated to economics. Now, let me tell you the format at the outset. Let me tell you the format how we shall approach this. Now, I'll be discussing 5 questions from economics every day. All right. And through those 5 questions, I'll try to cover all the points mentioned in your General Studies 3 syllabus. You must have seen your GS3 syllabus, right? It includes economics portion, it includes internal security, science and technology, it includes other things as well, right? Now for economics, this is your syllabus as far as mains is concerned, this and this, right? We'll take a look at this, that's the syllabus in brief, in a moment's time. But let me tell you how we shall approach this. Now, I'll be discussing 5 questions every day. Now, the details or the model answers for those 5 questions shall be made available to you through our PDF. But to download that PDF, you need to register on our app. All right? So just register on our app, enroll in our course, and you'll be able to access those PDFs and you'll be able to access the material that we are going to give you along with these questions. In the lecture itself, I'll be discussing the question. All right. I'll tell you how to approach the question. I'll tell you what sort of points you need to mention in your answers. I'll tell you how to structure your answer because that's very important for your mains examination. And I'll tell you how your introduction should be, how your conclusion should be, how your main body should be. All these things we'll discuss in the lecture itself. But the material shall be shared with you in PDF. All right. Now let's take a look at the topics that we shall cover in these lecture series for economics mains. We'll be covering each and every topic of your syllabus. So topic number 1 on which we'll spend good 2 or 3 lectures is Indian economy, issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development and employment. The other topic is inclusive growth and issues. Then government budgeting, which also includes fiscal policy. Right? Then agriculture related topics are mentioned quite a lot. Agriculture acquires a huge chunk of your economic syllabus as far as mains is concerned. So we'll be studying major crops, then issues related to direct and indirect farm subsidies, minimum support price, then food processing and related industries, then land reforms. And then we'll come back to we'll be actually moving away from agriculture. Then we'll discuss effects of liberalization on economy, changes in industrial policy and their effects on industrial growth, all these things. Then we'll dedicate good amount of time on infrastructure and investment models. All right. So these are the topics that we are going to cover through these lectures. All right. Now, in today's lecture, we'll be focusing on first part, that is Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. All right. Now, let me mention this again, that in this lecture, I will just discuss how the structure of your answer should be. All right. What sort of points you can mention, how you should write your introduction, how you should write your conclusion, how you should read the question and approach the question. All these intangible things I'll be discussing in the lecture itself. As far as the points are concerned, what should you write? As far as the trivia is concerned, facts are concerned, that need to be mentioned in your answer. Well, you'll be getting that in the PDFs. All right. So without further ado, let's begin today's discussion. In this discussion, we'll cover 5 questions, beginning with this first question. The idea of merging banks has become a practice in the recent past. In this context, discuss the issues and potential benefits associated with merging of public sector banks. To what extent it would help in addressing the burgeoning of non-performing assets. Now, this is a big and heavy question, and it requires at least 250 words. So let's take a look at how we should approach this question. Now, to understand this question, let's break it into parts. All right. Let's read the question carefully before. All right. The idea of merging banks has become a practice in the recent past. That's true. Government has merged a lot of banks, a lot of public sector banks. Now, in this context, discuss the issues and potential benefits associated with merging of public sector banks. So they have clearly asked you that mention the issues, that what are the problems that our country would face if we merge a lot of public sector banks, and what are the benefits, why government is moving in this direction. All right. To what extent it would help in addressing the burgeoning non-performing assets. Now, as we all know, that the public sector banks are facing this big problem that their NPA ratio is rising. Non-performing asset ratio is rising. All right. Now, do you think, that's what they have asked you, do you think that merging of public sector banks would address this problem? All right. Now, how will we approach this question? Now, in the beginning, in the introduction, you'll write a bit about the sort of problems that Indian banks are facing, the public sector banks in India are facing. So what will you write? Well, gross NPA ratio is rising. That's what you'll mention in 3 or 4 lines. Then what else is rising? Well, capital adequacy ratio CAR or CRAR, capital to risk weighted asset ratio, is declining, which means banks do not have enough capital with them. Then their profitability is also declining, and their profitability is judged by return on assets or return on equity. Now, these 3 things, these 3 aggregates are showing negative numbers, or I should say that these 3 are the problematic areas in which Indian banking sector is struggling. Right? Especially the public sector banks are struggling. They have high NPA ratio, their capital is less, their profitability is less. Now, then you'll write within the introduction itself, what are bank mergers? Now, what will you write? You'll write that to address these problems, the government has thought of banking sector consolidation. Government has thought of consolidating the banking sector. Now, to consolidate Indian banking sector, you have 2 options, mergers and acquisitions. Merger means that 2 banks merge to create a third entity, right? Merger means that company A and company B are merging to create a new company C. Acquisition means company A is actually absorbing company B. So the new entity will be company A itself. Company A is acquiring company B. All right. Merger means 2 new companies are merging and creating a third company. Right. So all this is happening with the Indian banking sector. Now, once this introduction is done, you have introduced the idea. That's what introduction is, right? Introduction means that you need to introduce your answer. Now they have asked you, will banking mergers and acquisitions solve the problem that Indian public sector banks are facing? Well, first you will mention what are the problems that Indian banks are facing. Then government has come up with mergers and acquisition. Then you will start with the benefits. Benefits of banking sector consolidation. How would Indian banking scene improve once government goes through this mergers and acquisition phase? Now, what are the advantages of bank consolidation? Mergers. Number one, economy of scale. Indian banking sector, especially the public sector banks, are very fragmented. There are small banks spread across the geography of your country, right? Now, if government consolidates these banks, if government merges certain banks into one new entity, then India would have big banks. You understand this point? Currently, Indian banking scene is fragmented. Once you merge these banks, you will have small number of big banks. Now, there is this concept called economy of scale, which means that as a production unit gains in size, as a production unit becomes big, it becomes more efficient. Its average cost goes down. That's what economy of scale means. So when small banks would merge and become one big bank, well, they'll become more efficient. As they say, big banks are more efficient than small banks, right? So when small banks would merge to form a new big bank, well, there will be economy of scale and you'll gain advantage because of that. Then next, I just mentioned that Indian banks have very low capital. These are small banks that have very low capital base. Once these small banks merge and become a bigger entity, well, they'll have a large capital base, right? So it would create large capital base for banks. And what is the advantage of a large capital base? Let's suppose a bank goes through a crisis of sorts, right? There are a few big borrowers that are not paying back. Let's suppose there is very big NPA ratio that banks are struggling with, right? Now, if a bank is big and it has a big capital base, then it can absorb losses. Currently, Indian banks are small, and that's why they are unable to even absorb small losses, and they are very close to failure, right? Once these small banks merge to become a big bank, they'll have a large capital base, and their ability to absorb losses would increase. Once their ability to absorb losses increases, well, it will reduce burden on the government. Currently, what is happening? Well, the thing is that when a small bank is on the verge of collapse, a small public sector bank is on the verge of collapse, well, government has to bail it out. Government has to recapitalize it. Now, when government has to recapitalize, it actually means that the taxpayer is recapitalizing, because where else the government is getting its money from? It's getting it from taxpayers. So taxpayers are bailing the banks out, bailing these failed banks out. Now, it's a burden on the government. It's a burden on their fiscal space as well. Their fiscal deficit rises because of that. Once these small banks become big, then what will happen? Well, it will reduce the burden on the government, especially fiscal burden. It also has the potential to reduce government's fiscal deficit also, right? So economy of scale, large capital base, reduced burden on the government. And once a bank has a large capital base, then it has the ability to absorb its NPA also. NPA ratio might also come down. Right? So these are the 4 major advantages that you need to mention in detail. You'll get the details in the model answer itself, but there are a few short advantages also, small advantages also. Let me read them out. Well, when a bank has a large capital base, it has the ability to adopt new and path-breaking technology. It has the ability to adopt new technology, right? And that makes sense also. Smaller banks have smaller money, smaller amounts of money, small capital, and it's very expensive for them to absorb new technology that will give them some efficiency. But if a bank is big, it has the ability to pay for new technology, which will eventually in the long run make it more efficient, right? So adoption of new technology, then improvement in public trust. Public trust in banking would improve. Why? Because now a person knows, for example, I'm a customer of a big bank. I know that small NPAs here and there won't impact the bank because this particular bank has a huge capital base. For example, I'm a customer of ICICI Bank. Now I know that ICICI Bank has a big capital base. So a few NPAs here and there won't impact it. And my trust in ICICI Bank remains intact. Right? That's the advantage of investing with big banks. That's the advantage of depositing your money in big banks. Right? So public trust would improve. Then new technology, capital requirements, and yes, a large capital base would also mean that banks would cater to Basel requirements. These are international standards that all banks have to keep. Basel requirements actually want that banks should have a minimum capital adequacy ratio. They should have some capital to absorb losses. Now, if banks become big, they'll be able to absorb huge losses and they'll be catering to or they'll follow Basel requirements, right? So these are the major advantages. Now, in your model answer that you shall get after registering on our app, you'll get the PDF with this lecture. There are other advantages as well. But these 6 advantages are the major advantages that you need to mention. That is categorically essential for you in your answer if you want to score more marks in this answer. All right. Now, with this, we are done with the first part of your question where they are asking you potential benefits associated with merging of public sector banks. Well, let's take a look at the issues. What are the problems associated with merger of public sector banks? Let's take a look at that. Issues. Well, the number one issue is it will create monopoly. Today, there are fewer banks. Today, there are small number of banks, right? So, we as customers have choice. If we are not satisfied with one bank, then we can go to the other bank. But when there are few banks, few large banks, you are left with little choice, right? And that creates a situation of monopoly. Now, monopoly is not bad in itself, but the thing is that if one large bank fails, then it has a bearing on the entire financial system. So currently what is happening is that there is a big number of small banks, right? So if one of them fails, it won't impact or it won't have that much of an impact on the other banks because these are chote banks, right? Small banks. But if there are few banks but big banks and one of them fails, then the entire financial system stands vulnerable, right? These banks would become too big to fail. And that's a bad thing. Monopoly in this sense is a bad thing because there would be fewer number of too big to fail banks. Government cannot allow them to fail at all. All right. Then, third issue is proper implementation. You know, bank merger doesn't include that you randomly select some banks and merge them. That shouldn't be the case. You have to look and you have to be sure that the banks you are merging are synergetic in nature, are actually are in sync, right? You cannot randomly pick banks and merge them. You have to be proper with your implementation. And there is a risk that these mergers won't be proper. There will be clash of culture. Different banks have different working culture. There will be clash of culture. All right. Then there is this another thing. This another thing is that employment stands to lose. If many banks are merging, right, then all these many banks have surplus employees as well. They will lose their jobs, right? So it has a bearing on employment scenario also. Clear? So Majorly, these are the few issues that need to be taken care of. Now, what should be your conclusion with this answer? What should be your conclusion? Now, your conclusion should be positive, right? So, what can you write? What will you write? Let me give you an example. You'll write that the scene of bank mergers and acquisition seems to be working, right? There are a few costs associated with it, but there are a few gains. And at the moment, it appears that gains outweigh the costs. Right? You'll write on a positive note. So at the moment, gains appear to outweigh costs. So government should go ahead with banking sector consolidation, but it should make sure that these costs associated with bank mergers do not increase. You need to contain those costs. Plus, the entire banking sector won't get rid of their problems unless this bank merger is accompanied with other banking sector reforms. Banking sector consolidation alone would not solve all the problems associated with the banking sector. This particular set of reforms need to be accompanied with other reforms as well, such as governance reforms. Right? And various other reforms that need to accompany with the banking sector mergers. Right? So this is not a one-stop solution. That's what you'll write in your conclusion. You'll write that banking sector consolidation is a good step. It's a step in the right direction. But we need to make sure that it needs to be accompanied with other reforms so that the cost associated with banking sector consolidation does not outweigh the gains associated with it. And that will be your conclusion. Now, my advice to you all would be that please read the model answers that are given to you with this particular lecture. All right. The extra information that you need to write in your answers would be made available to you in those model answers. Now, let's move to our next question, which is stress on economic indicators like GDP is catering to people's needs as consumers, but it is not fulfilling their aspirations as citizens of good societies. Analyze. What the question is asking is that we generally, economists and various policymakers, economic policymakers, generally focus on quantitative aspects. Quantitative aspects of economy. For example, they focus on numbers. What are those numbers? GDP, GNP, gross investment, right? Inflation, and many more. So generally the focus of economists is on the quantitative aspect. But what about qualitative aspects? Qualitative aspects includes human development, education, health, life expectancy, skill level, right? All these things. So what they're saying is that focus on these quantitative aspects is good for the economy as long as we are focusing on consumers. But these consumers are also citizens of your country, and you need to take care of their qualitative life things as well, right? You need to take care of their money, you need to take care of their economic aspect, but you also need to take care of their qualitative stuff like their health, education, skill level, human development. Now, do you think that these economic indicators satisfy these qualitative aspects as well? Do they fulfill the aspirations of citizens? They are fulfilling the aspirations of consumers, but are they fulfilling the aspirations of citizens? That's what you need to answer. So how will you approach it? Well, simply put, first you will tell that generally to look at, whenever we are analyzing the economic situation of a country, we look at quantitative and qualitative aspects. Right? Now focus on quantitative aspects has its own set of advantages. You'll mention those advantages in point form. What are those advantages? Well, it gives you hard data on which you can plan your economy, on the basis of which you can plan your economy. right? If you do not know what sort of investment levels are there in the steel sector or what sort of investment levels are there in the coal sector, how would the government plan or how would the government know that which sector is struggling and which sector is not? If the government is not aware of its GDP levels, then how would it take decisions on what to do and what not to do? Maybe government's GDP levels are very high. Nations' GDP levels are very high. In that aspect, government needs to focus on other things as well. But if it doesn't know the GDP figures, how will it plan? How will it plan the numbers? For planning, for informed decision making, informed policy making, you need numbers. And these numbers come from quantitative indicators, right? And there are other advantages of quantitative indicators as well. You can write and you can see those advantages in the model answer that you're going to be provided. Let's focus on where does quantitative indicators fall short? What does GDP not tell you? What are the disadvantages of just focusing on GDP levels, right? Focusing on these quantitative figures. Let's focus on that. So what are the disadvantages of GDP? Well, you'll say that GDP is very good to measure how much wealth is being produced in a country in 1 year. It's very good with that. But it does not tell you about the distribution of that wealth. If Mukesh Ambani is producing 1 crore rupees worth of wealth, then the GDP would say that India's wealth has increased by 1 crore. But it won't tell you that how that 1 crore increase in wealth has been distributed. Maybe it has only benefited Mr. Mukesh Ambani. It has not benefited all. So GDP only focuses on total amount of goods and services produced in an economy in 1 year. It doesn't tell you how the money earned from those goods and services are being distributed. Whether there is equality or inequality in the economy, GDP is silent about that. GDP only talks about how much wealth is being produced in 1 year. That's it. It is not telling you how that wealth is being distributed. So this is one of the disadvantages, which doesn't tell you the economic situation of a country. So I'll give you one example. In GDP terms, USA is a very big economy. USA is bigger than Norway, Sweden. USA is way big, way better as far as GDP is concerned than Norway or Sweden. But in terms of equality, in terms of development of citizens, Norway and Sweden are way ahead of USA. In terms of human development, in terms of qualitative aspects of a citizen's life, Norway and Sweden are way ahead. Though GDP of USA is very high, but Norway and Sweden perform way better than USA in terms of human development. Plus, wealth is equitably distributed in Norway and Sweden, whereas that is not the case in USA. They say that in USA, top 1% earn close to 90% of the country's wealth. Top 1%. So there is huge level of inequality in USA, whereas that is not the case in Norway and Sweden. Still, if we just compare the GDP levels, USA is far ahead of Norway and Sweden. So GDP doesn't tell you anything about distribution of wealth. All right. Then next is GDP is silent about externalities, positive as well as negative. So for example, there is a factory and that factory produces a lot of wealth. That factory produces a lot of goods and services. In that sense, if you are only focusing on GDP levels, then GDP is increasing. India's GDP is increasing because that factory is producing more wealth. But while producing wealth, while producing goods and services, it is polluting nearby river and the air in which it stands, right? It is creating a lot of pollution, water pollution, air pollution, which will have the impact on the nearby citizens, and it would decrease the quality of life of nearby citizens. But that decrease in quality of life of nearby citizens due to the pollution caused by this particular factory is not accounted for in GDP. GDP will only say that India's wealth is increasing because of this factory. It would be silent on what sort of disadvantages this factory is producing for other nearby citizens. Now, those disadvantages that this particular factory is creating for other nearby citizens comes under negative externalities. And GDP is silent about these negative externalities. So just focusing on GDP wouldn't give you the exact idea of how a citizen is leading its life, how the quality of citizen's life is increasing or decreasing. Make sense? All right. The other thing is GDP does not capture non-monetary exchanges. It is silent on non-monetary exchanges. I'll give you an example. For example, housewives. Housewives are doing domestic labor, right? But that domestic labor is unpaid domestic labor, and that is not included as an economic activity. Hence, the service provided by a housewife is not included in GDP. Just like that, there are various other non-monetary exchanges that are not mentioned in GDP, and you do not get the actual idea of how your economy is functioning. All right? So it is silent about that as well. All right? Then there are a few other things. Yeah. Focusing on just GDP, gross investment, wouldn't give you any idea about the health outcomes. Wouldn't give you any idea about the education levels. Wouldn't give you any idea about the crime rate in that country, the society that people are living in. That won't, the GDP numbers or these quantitative indicators would be silent on all these things. Well, we need to focus on these aspects also because these things are very important in a person's life. GDP would be silent about that. So these are the disadvantages of quantitative indicators. Now, as far as the question is concerned, you have discussed both qualitative and you have discussed both the advantages and disadvantages of quantitative indicators, GDP to be exact, right? Now, what should be your conclusion to this answer? Because they have asked you, analyze. What should be your conclusion, all right? Now, what you'll say is that, I'll tell you. What should you write? Well, they say that qualitative indicators are important, but that doesn't mean that quantitative indicators are not important. GDP is important, money is important, investment levels are important, because the only way you can improve the lives of your qualitative aspects of the lives of your citizens is through money. If you do not have money, then how will you fund improving the health outcomes in your country? How will you fund health infrastructure? How will you fund educational infrastructure? So to improve the qualitative aspects of a citizen's life, you need money. And how will you generate that money? Well, you will generate that money through GDP, by increasing GDP. Therefore, focusing on quantitative aspects is important because it would generate resources through which you can improve the qualitative aspects of the life. But government should not lose sight of the qualitative aspects as well. Government should not just focus on GDP. It needs to focus on GDP, but it should not, that should not be the only area of focus. It should focus on other aspects as well, so that a holistic development of citizen can take place. That should be your conclusion. Make sense? All right. Chalo fir. Let's move on to the third question. Question third is about universal basic income. Universal basic income has its own pros and cons. Discussed in the context of Indian economy. Well, it's a fairly direct question. What will you do in this? Read the question once more. Universal basic income has its own pros and cons. That means they're just asking you to tell you about the pros and cons of universal basic income, the idea of universal basic income. Now, what will you write in the introduction of this answer? Simple. Well, you'll write, what is UBI? Universal basic income. You'll give the definition of universal basic income. Well, what is universal basic income? If you can write in your own words, that's brilliant. But if you can see the definition from somewhere else, you can see the definition from your model answer as well. Well, universal basic income is that each and every citizen of your country is entitled to a certain amount of money, irrespective of anything. Every citizen, whether he's rich or poor, whether he's upper caste, lower caste, whether he's upper class, lower class, each and every citizen is entitled to a certain amount By virtue of them being the citizens of that country, right? Every citizen of a country is entitled to a certain amount. Hence, we are using the word universal. Universal means all citizens shall be covered, rich or poor. Even Ambani ji would get the same amount as a poor person in a household would get, right? It's a universal concept. Now, universal basic income, you can write the definition. Then you can also write who introduced this idea. Well, you'll find in your model answer, you'll find that there are various names who talked about universal basic income. One name in particular is Milton Friedman. Very famous libertarian economist, Milton Friedman. He in 1962 in his book called Capitalism and Freedom, or Freedom and Capitalism, talked about negative income tax. What is negative income tax? Well, income tax is certain portion of your income goes to the government. Negative income tax would mean certain portion from government would come to you. Now, negative income tax is nothing but universal basic income. Milton Friedman did talk about universal basic income. He didn't use these words precisely. He used the word negative income tax. Yet, nonetheless, this idea of universal basic income has been there since 1962. So once you're done with the introduction of your answer, now you will divide your answer in two parts. Benefits of universal basic income, cons or disadvantages of universal basic income. Let's come to the benefits of universal basic income. Well, number one, the poor, marginalized, and vulnerable would benefit from this. They'll get some income security through this. Well, that's true. Then next would be, as they say that Industry 4.0 is going to replace all the jobs in the world. What do we mean by Industry 4.0? Well, these new technologies, AI, machine learning, 3D printing, Internet of Things, and many more. These new technologies would replace a lot of jobs and many people would be unemployed. Now, to support those unemployed people, if those unemployed people have some form of surety, some universal basic income, well, they can stay secure, right? So in a sense, all those people who are going to be displaced, or all that structural unemployment that is going to be caused by Industry 4.0, well, people would have some respite from that if universal basic income becomes a reality. So that is one of the advantages of universal basic income. Now, then next, you see, various welfare schemes have certain errors. What are those errors? Certain targeted welfare schemes, inclusion and exclusion errors. So let's suppose government has a particular welfare scheme in which it will target all the below poverty line people. Right? Now, government has various schemes for that. For example, National Food Security Act targets certain population so that their food security needs are catered to. Right? Now, all these targeted schemes have inclusion and exclusion errors. Now, what are those inclusion exclusion errors? Inclusion error means that those who do not deserve that welfare expenditure, those people who are well off, those people who do not deserve that subsidy, are included in the list and government gives them that subsidy. For example, Lpg subsidy was designed to help the poor, but various rich people are also taking benefits of Lpg subsidy. This is an example of inclusion error. People who do not deserve those subsidies are included in the list. Then, the worst form is exclusion error. People who actually deserve to be catered to, who actually deserve those subsidies, are somehow out of the list. So for example, there is this scheme called Manrega, right? Now there are certain people who should be included in Manrega list, but they are not because of various problems, like they do not possess an Aadhaar card, their Aadhaar card is faulty, or many other reasons. They do not possess the required documents. So certain deserving people are excluded. Now, if we cater to this idea, if we implement universal basic income, well, there won't be any issue of inclusion error because everyone is included. It's a universal concept. Every citizen would be included. So we won't talk about inclusion errors. And there won't be any exclusion errors. Why? Because, simply put, everyone is included, no one is excluded. Make sense? So these errors won't take place. Then, it will give people more choice. Right? Generally what happens is, government gives you LPG subsidy. With that subsidy, you can only purchase LPG cylinders. But let's suppose you do not want to purchase LPG cylinders. You want to do something else with that money. Well, you don't have that choice. But with universal basic income, you'll have that choice. You'll be given money directly. Now, it's your choice how you want to spend that money. Once you're given choice, in the words of Amartya Sen, you'll be empowered to take your own life's decisions. So this particular universal basic income, it's better than subsidies. Then, well, there is insurance against shocks. Insurance against shock means, for example, there is an economic crisis like the recent one in which many people got unemployed. But if they have the security of universal basic income, they won't feel that bad once they lose their job, right? So insurance against economic shocks. Then, it will, the most important, the reason why Milton Friedman talked about universal basic income, it would reduce bureaucracy. It would make public administration more efficient. Currently, there are various government offices, people are getting salaries. There are big government offices whose job is to provide subsidies or welfare to people. If government implements universal basic income, the idea of universal basic income, and remove all these subsidies. So let's suppose next day, tomorrow, Indian government decides that we won't give any subsidy. Instead, we'll drop some money into the bank account of each and every citizen in our country. So all these people who are employed with government of India, there won't be any need of them, right? They won't be required. Wasteful government expenditure would be reduced and people would also be happy. Make sense? So it makes your public administration more lean, more efficient. And that's the biggest advantage. The only advantage why Milton Friedman talked about this. Clear? Now, we have discussed the benefits. Now let's take a look at the disadvantages. This idea has its own set of disadvantages, its own set of cons. Now, what are those cons? Number one, well, it would lead to conspicuous spending. What do I mean by that? Well, just now we talked about that universal basic income would give choice to people. Now, with choice comes certain disadvantages as well. For example, you've given me money and you've given me the freedom to use that money any way I want. I might use that money on drugs, alcohol, and all the other sin goods. Not required things, bad things. That's the danger. Plus, there is this another problem. There are patriarchal, especially in India's case. India's society is a patriarchal society in which the head of the household is the male member and he would be given that money. Now, he won't spend that money on his family. He might spend that money on his liquor, alcohol, drugs and all that. So it won't actually benefit the people who need it. The women of the household, the children of the household. That's a problem. Then, huge fiscal burden. The scheme of universal basic income is not cheap. Government would have a huge fiscal burden. It'd be a very expensive scheme, right? Then, it would distort labor market. Now, what do I mean by distortion of labor market? Well, if people are getting money for free, there won't be any motivation to work. People won't work because they're already getting money for free, right? So don't you think wages would go up? How? Because now people are not willing to work, the employers would have to offer them very high wages so as to attract them to come to work. Because now people don't want to work, they are getting money for free. Right? Now this would distort labor market. In a sense, it would increase labor cost of companies. And once labor cost of companies increases, profits would decrease, right? And many other problems that businesses would face. Many businesses would close down because they can't afford this high labor cost, right? So it would distort labor market. And yes, the other is moral hazard. We just talked about it. There are people who say that it would make people lazy and they won't be willing to work, right? That's one of the problems. Now, in this particular question, I want you guys to write conclusion yourself. Now, this is the idea. What should be the conclusion? Think about it. Before actually seeing the model answer, because the conclusion is mentioned in the model answer, before actually seeing the model answer, just think of a conclusion yourself and then tally it from your model answer. All right? Now let's move on to the next question. Question number 4. Tax litigation takes a heavy toll on the economy and should be reduced. Discuss. It's a fairly direct question, right? So what you need to do is you have to tell, or you have to mention in your answer what are the sort of problems that are associated with tax terrorism or tax harassment by tax officials. And too many tax litigation means cases with respect to income tax, cases with respect to taxes. Too many of these cases actually hamper your economy, right? That's a fairly direct question. Now, so let's discuss this particular question in brief. As far as the extra information is concerned, you'll get that in your model answers. All right. So what will you write in your introduction? Well, you know, as per the Economic Survey 2018, Income Tax Department is the biggest litigant. It is the biggest party to all the cases with respect to taxes. And the bad thing is that Income Tax Department actually loses 85% of all their cases. Income Tax Department actually loses 85% of its cases. That means many of those cases filed by Income Tax Department are frivolous. They're just taking the precious time of judiciary, right? This is a problem. Plus, there are close to 1.37 lakh cases with respect to direct taxes and 1.45 lakh cases with respect to indirect taxation that are pending with our judiciary. These are the number of pending cases. So this is a big problem, and you need to write about this big problem in your introduction. So what will you do is that you'll write that Income Tax Department is the biggest litigant in our country and 85% of the cases are generally lost by Income Tax Department. Plus, there are 1.37 lakh cases that are pending with our judiciary with respect to direct taxes. 1.45 lakh indirect tax cases that are pending with our judiciary. So this clogs up your judiciary, and this is a problem. This is the problem that you're facing. Now, what they asked you is that tax litigation takes a heavy toll on the economy and should be reduced. Discuss. So the main body of your answer should be, this is your introduction. The main body of your answer should be problems associated with excessive tax litigation. Right? So the main body would be problems. Now, number one problem, it clogs up your judiciary. It clogs up your judiciary. It increases pendency in your judiciary. And when cases are pending in your judiciary, well, the judiciary doesn't have enough time to pay attention to important cases. And this actually is very bad for the overall justice in your country. Right? Now, excessive tax litigation also leads to tax harassment. Honest taxpayers lose out on that. The evil people, the evil taxpayers or people who do not pay income tax, well, they should be harassed. Well, harass is not the word, but they should be taken to court. But the honest taxpayers shouldn't be harassed. But this amount of scrutiny actually leads to harassment of honest taxpayers as well. Then with this, connected to this point is loss in ease of doing business. Of course, when businessmen do not get justice soon, quickly, well, it leads to decline in their confidence in India. And we talk about making India a manufacturing hub. We talk about make in India. We talk about invest in India, right? Now, foreign investors won't invest in India if they know that India's tax officials are harassing business owners. So this would amount to loss in ease of doing business. Then overall business climate declines. Clear? And many more. There are many other disadvantages associated with excessive tax litigation. I won't talk about that. You can read about those disadvantages in your model answer. All right. Now, what I'll focus on is the conclusion of this answer. Well, what you'll write is, because they have asked you also, it's not actually the conclusion, they have asked you, a toll on the economy and should be reduced. They are asking you to discuss this. So first of all, you'll write how this can be reduced. Well, recently, Indian government actually came up with a direct tax reform measure. Honoring the honest platform. Honoring the honest platform, in which there shall be faceless assessment, faceless appeal mechanism, and taxpayer charter. So what you'll write is that the government has recently come up with this particular reform, which has the potential to reduce excessive tax litigation. It will actually improve the culture of tax paying in our country. The honest taxpayer would be considered a partner in nation building rather than a criminal, right? Currently, income tax officials assume that a particular person is a criminal and then prosecute him, right? That shouldn't be the idea. Clear? So this particular reform would improve the litigation scenario. It will free up our courts and will improve the overall economy in our country. Make sense? That's the answer. You can look at it in your model answers as well. All right. All right. Next question. Question number 5, the last question. Estimating economic activity is never going to be an easy task in an economy that has poor data standards. Examine. Well, this is again a fairly direct question. What it is trying to convey is that if you want to estimate your economic activity, if you want to estimate the economic activity in India, you need to have proper data standards, because without that data, you won't be correctly able to estimate this system, or you won't be able to correctly estimate how your economy is functioning. Plus, you won't be able to rely on your data. For example, if people in India know that India's data collection standards are very poor, they won't trust the GDP numbers that are coming out of CSO or NSO. They won't trust the gross investment levels that are coming out. They won't trust the inflation levels that are coming out. If your data data integrity is lost, then people stop trusting the data that is coming out. Clear? And data is very important to correctly estimate economic activity. So what they are asking is, they're just asking you to examine the situation of data standards in India. Now, it's an interesting question, and that is why I want you guys to attempt this question yourself. I have discussed and I have briefly outlined what should be the idea behind this question and how you should approach it. And plus the 4 questions that we have discussed so far, in these discussions you must have known by now that what sort of things you need to mention in your introduction and what sort of things you need to mention in your conclusion, right? So try to answer this question yourself and then look at model answers. Clear? You should do this thing with each and every question that we are discussing. Attempt these questions yourself, it will be a good practice, and then check your answer through the model answers that we are going to provide you with this particular lecture. Clear? Makes sense? Alright, so try attempting this question yourself. It's a good exercise, it's a good homework for you all. Alright? Yeah, so yeah, that's it. That's it. We are done with our lecture. And you must be wondering what is written over here. Well, it's a motivational quote of sorts. You can read it, you can get motivated by it. If not, then please ignore it. What it says is, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Many of you who are appearing for this year's mains might have given mains in previous years as well. You might have failed in the previous attempts as well. Well, you shouldn't be disheartened by that. As this quote says, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that counts. You know who told that? Who wrote that? Winston Churchill, the World War hero for UK. So yeah, on that note, let's conclude this lecture. I hope you liked today's lecture. I hope it added some value to your preparation. If you have any doubt, well, you're free to ask us those doubts. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you next time with more stuff.